Talking about Google's DoubleClick for publishers, what we refer to as DFP. My name's Olivia Lavin and I'm a Strategic Partner Manager here at Google in Dublin, and I'm joined by my colleague Cillian Jenkinson.
Hello.
Who's our platform specialist. Okay, so before we kick into the content, we'd just like to remind you if you could all register for our live streams via g.co/AdSense on air. That way we'll keep you updated with all upcoming topics within our live streams that the AdSense team deliver every month. We'd also like to give you the opportunity to ask any questions about the content in today's live stream, and you can do this by going to g.co/AdSense question. And we're going to give you time at the end for a Q&A after the presentation. As always at Google, we really value your feedback. So we'd like to ask if you could fill out the feedback survey that we'll distribute after the presentation. And then in doing so, we'll send you a PDF of the presentation. Perfect. Okay, so let's kickstart into the agenda. So like we said, today we're going to be discussing DoubleClick for publishers. We're going to give you a basic guide to the network setup within DFP. And then Cillian will take over and talk about inventory and how best to set this up in DFP, and then also touch on how best to tag as well. Also wanted to point out before we kick off that if you already have DFP, and you're looking for ways to monetize, or you're looking for the best ways to traffic your inventory, we're going to be running a second DFP live stream that's going to be taking place on the 11th of July. So stay tuned for that. This specifically will just give you an introduction into DFP and how best to set up your inventory. Perfect. So we hope that the live stream will probably take about 30 minutes, and then the remaining time will go into question and answer. So if we bring it back to basics and understand what an ad server is. So an ad server, it's used to place adverts on your website, with DFP being an ad serving solution. So DFP is an ad server where you can sell, schedule, deliver, and measure all of your inventory. So just to get a better understanding of how an ad server works, your user will arrive on your website and the content gets loaded from the web server, but the ad also needs to come from an ad server, such as DFP. Ads are requested from the ad server, and the website gives DFP a list of criteria as to which ads would be suitable to fill the empty slots on the page. DFP then selects the ads that should be served, and this is based on certain criteria. So this could be the size of the ad slot on the page, the date and time of day, and geographical location of the user. Ads are then selected and returned to the website for the user to see, and then DFP will track then how the ad is served and how many times it gets clicked by the user. So if you're asking now whether you need to use an ad server, the two main questions you should be asking are, do you manage more than one ad network on your website? For example, an ad network being Google AdSense. So an ad server is useful to manage multiple ad networks in order to maximize revenue from the website's traffic. Another question to ask yourself is, do you work with direct advertisers? So an ad server can be most useful to handle all of your advertising campaigns. So this then allows you to focus on creating good quality content. So just to recap here, because we feel this bit is quite important, DFP is only intended for publishers who manage multiple ad networks and need a consistent way to deliver ads to make them the most money. It's only intended for publishers who receive multiple requests from advertisers who want to buy space on their website directly, and for those that need greater control over when, where, and to whom the ads deliver. So now if we look at the benefits of an ad server, so historically or without an ad server, you'd have to hard code every tag from every demand source to implementing all the various codes on your site. So you'd have to implement HTML code for AdSense, for the likes of Criteo, Rubicon, and various codes given to you by those buying ad space from you directly. With DFP, all you need to do is implement DFP code on your website. So as you can see here on the diagram, DFP acts as a central repository where publishers can deliver impressions from all their demand sources. So for instance, AdSense, your third-party networks, directly sold ads and your house ads, using one easy to use interface that puts everything in competition together. It also allows you to view reporting in one central place rather than referring to each individual demand source for reporting. So in terms of the benefits then for DFP, DoubleClick programmatic ecosystem consists of the publisher, the advertiser, and the user. So it's a full stack integrated solution spanning the buy side, which are your advertisers, and the sell side, your publishers. And as a result, there are various synergies and linkages from being part of this ecosystem. Within this, we provide advanced targeting use of data. So if advertisers have specific campaign goals, you can add the additional delivery and targeting options, such as geography, day and time, custom targeting criteria you define. And plus, you can set up advanced forecasting to give you a better sense of how many impressions you'll have available to sell to your direct advertisers. And finally, DFP allows you to maximize revenue by using best-in-class yield management tools. So it allows AdSense to compete against other networks in real time. So you'll get the most revenue from every ad impression. And plus, if you've got any inventory that you haven't sold yourself, you can enable Google AdSense to ensure that you always have the opportunity to make the most money from your content. This will be discussed in more detail, though, during our next DFP live stream, which is on the 11th of July. So just before we dive into the next part, I'd say key takeaways from introduction to DFP are that you only really require DFP if you're going to manage multiple ad networks and or multiple direct advertisers. So next, we're going to discuss a basic guide to your network setup. So once you've set up and signed into DFP, we recommend you to follow the pre-setup instructions here. So the first being adding users to your DFP account. We next recommend that you link your Google AdSense account with DFP. You do need a Google AdSense account in order to have DFP. Then you can add your company's advertisers, ad networks and third parties. And then finally, you may wish to set up some labeling rules as well. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take you into the DFP user interface, just so that we can show you just basic guide to how to set up these things here. So within this DFP interface that you should be seeing now, you've got here the main navigation, which are the product sections on the left. As a default, when you go into DFP, you see the home page. And within the home page, it's set up with dashboard cards. If you go to the plus icon at the bottom, you can add additional dashboard cards. So, for instance, if you wanted to show performance of ad units over the last 7 days, you could do a network snapshot. You'd select that and then you could add them as an additional dashboard to your homepage. Now, there's lots of help and support within the interface. The first being the search bar at the top, where you could search, for instance, ad units that you may have. So here, yeah, this ad unit here coming up, K. Jenkinson Technology. You've got the question mark icon to the right. And again, this acts as a mini help center within the interface. The bell icon to the right also displays notifications or updates from Google. And if there's anything that you've got or any incorrect set, that should display here. The 3 dots to the right also provide links to settings and DFP training. And within settings, you can also find this in the admin section on the left side of the screen. So yes, if we go within admin now and we set up users, so within access and authorization, you can set up user roles. So here you would select new user. And then if you just type in example user, so here if we take Joe Bloggs, enter Joe Bloggs' email. So yeah, joebloggs@google.com. And then what's important here is to select the appropriate role for Joe Bloggs. So here we've selected administrator, but for a list of all the other roles, if you click on the question mark icon, it'll bring it up. So administrator here gets full access to all functionality within the account. The next thing we recommend you to do, so after you've saved that, what will happen then is Joe Bloggs will receive an email inviting him to join the DFP interface. And there's also an expiry date on that email as well. Okay, so yes, so the next thing we suggest you do is to link your AdSense account with DFP. And so in order to do that, if you go into admin, global settings, and then here under linked accounts, if you click on the plus linked account, it'll ask you to insert your web property code, and this is your AdSense web property code, display name, contact email, and also to validate the AdSense account, your postal code or last 5 digits of your phone number when you open the AdSense account. And then if you save that, we've already put an example in here now. But yeah, once you save that, you then just need to go into your Google AdSense account and again into settings, access and authorization, and then third-party access. If you enable that, it will then show in your linking of accounts. But what's really important to note here is the edit button on the right. So make sure that you tick the default for dynamic allocation. This is really important. And just briefly explaining what dynamic allocation is, it's a feature that enables your guaranteed reserved line items to compete with AdSense or your remnant line items without interfering with the ultimate goal of your guaranteed line items. But like I said, we'll go through this in a lot more detail in our next live stream. So moving on, so once you've linked your AdSense account, you can link all your other companies and ad networks. You do this still within admin under companies and then select new company. So if we look at an ad network and add, say, exchange. So if we type in index exchange here, and then it's just a simple case then of saving that to add it as a new network. Perfect, so that should save there. And then one final thing that we wanted to highlight is labeling. So labeling is within admin and inventory. Labels are used to group objects for a variety of purposes. So just wanted to make reference to the labeling types. So with competitive exclusion, you can categorize line items to prevent 2 line items in the same category from being shown at the same time on a web page. So for example, you could categorize line items as auto and prevent 2 different car companies from showing ads together. In ad exclusion, you categorize line items so that you can prevent them from being delivered in emergency situations. For example, you can use the ad exclusion labels to prevent airline ads from being displayed next to news articles about a plane crash. So ad exclusions also require that you make changes to your ad tags. And finally, frequency capping for ad units. So you can use labels to set frequency caps for particular sets of creatives when they're served to particular ad units, and then you apply the labels to both the creatives and the ad units. Great, so I think that's everything in terms of the tour of the interface. So now we're going to be moving over to Killian talking about inventory setup.
Hello everyone, my name's Killian. I'm a DFP platform specialist working in the online partnerships group based in Dublin. And big thanks to Olivia for a high-level introduction to DFP. But what I'm going to be taking you through today is what follows after you've done your basic setup. And in general, there are 3 pillars that follow after the basic administration setup. The first one is setting up your inventory. followed by your inventory. You will obviously want to tag your page with your ad units. And the last one would be trafficking in order to generate monetization. So today, for the remainder of this Hangout on Air, we're going to be focusing on how to set up your inventory and best practice there. We're also going to be touching at some high level, some tagging, and for further reference in terms of trafficking and monetization, that'll be included in our next Hangout on Air in July. Great. So there's three main drivers behind how you should set up your inventory. And the primary driver above all else is definitely your direct sales. You want an inventory structure that represents your rate card and how you want to sell directly. So that is your primary driver behind setting up your inventory. The other drivers behind setting up your inventory are reporting, and also you want to facilitate ease of reporting and ease of trafficking. Inventory is typically something that's set up at the beginning of your account and is rarely changed. So for this reason, it's really important to spend some time thinking about what you want to obtain and what best practice looks like in terms of your own direct sales. So there are three basic components to inventory. Those are the ad unit, the key value, and the placements. Most of you may have already heard of ad units, so we're going to start with that one. So the way I want you to think of ad units is ad units are like the basic building blocks of your inventory. They don't contain the actual ads themselves. Rather, they're like folders or subfolders within folders that contain all the information and all the detail that you want past your ad request. Things like sizes and additional information. So as I mentioned before, the ad units are like folders or subfolders, and DFP SB offers two levels of hierarchy for your inventory. They operate in a parent-child relationship, so anything targeted at the top level will automatically default to targeting the lower level child ad units. So there's two scenarios when you're thinking about setting up your ad unit inventory structure. The first is if and when you have one property, which could be a site or an app. And the second scenario is multiple properties, which could be sites, apps, or a mixture of sites and apps. So we're going to deep dive into the first scenario now, which is one property, a site or app. So our best practice here is definitely that your top level of inventory structure should match in form and content. Should match the form and content of your site or app. So as we can see in an example here called the Review Center, which should be appearing on your screen shortly, we have we have a navigation bar at the top with various different content sections. For example, you have home, electronics, entertainment, home and garden, and so on. So if we flick back to the presentation now, as you can see, scenario one, our top level completely replicates the content that you see here in terms of home, electronics, entertainment, home and garden. Now, our second level, and this is where decision time comes. Our second level, well, this really depends on your rate card and your direct sales. And I really can't stress this point enough, because your second level will be completely determined by your direct sales and your rate card. So depending on how you sell and where the demand for your inventory is, from a direct sales point of view, you will either choose a subsection or position for your second level. So if we flip back to the example, the Review Center, as we can see, under electronics, for example, there are multiple different subsections. There's audio, computers, in-car electronics, and so on. Under entertainment, similarly, we have multiple different subsections. So it really depends where the direct sales, where the demand for the direct sales is under your subsection, if you want to sell by subsections. Alternatively, we can see on the Review Center that we have an ad at the very top, located here. This one is Oxford FinTech Program. And we also have some advertisements below this, and we have some advertisements at the bottom of the page. So really, it depends on where the demand is on your site, as we mentioned before, whether you want to sell by positions or whether you want to sell by subsections. But this is all determined by whether you have direct sales or not. Okay, so back to the presentation. So as we mentioned beforehand, this is how it looks in theory. You either have your top level completely replicates the content of your site. So you could have two sections, for example, section A, section B, with multiple different subsections below that. And if the demand for your direct sales comes from subsections, then you would set up your second level accordingly. Alternatively, in the scenario number 2 over here, we have the exact same 2 sections, but this time the demand for your content comes from positions. That could be bottom banner, top banner, right skyscraper, MPU, and so on and so forth. Here's a deep dive of a particular section in the example that we see in Review Center. So if we go back to the Review Center website, there is a section called Website. And under Website, there are 5 different subsections. So going back to the presentation now, as we can see here, we've just carved this out and done a demonstration of how this looks in a cross-sectional view. So on the left, you'll see websites, and then you'll have the 5 categories or subsections beneath it. And then on the right-hand side, you have, again, the same top-level ad unit, which is website, but this time you have it carved up by position. So top, side left, middle, side right, bottom. So again, this is completely determined by your direct sales. And if you do not have direct sales, it's not necessary to go into such depth or complexity in your inventory structure. Here's how the 2 scenarios look in entirety. So this is our top level, of course, matches the form and the content of our site. And the bottom level, depending on your direct sales, will either be a mixture of subsections or of positions. So in the first situation, we've included 2 subsections beneath each top-level ad unit. But of course, you can have as many as you want here, depending on where you have your direct sales in your subsections. In the second example, you see that we have our second level as done by position. In this case, we've used above the fold, denoting all the viewable ads when you first open a page, and below the fold. But you can do anything you want. You can have MPU, leaderboard, right skyscraper, and so on.
Could I just jump in here, actually, Cillian, and ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So if a publisher has indirect demand, how should they set it up?
Yeah. So as I explained earlier, I don't think this level of complexity is necessary until such a time that they have direct sales. As I mentioned before, direct sales is completely driven by, will completely drive your ad unit inventory structure. So you should have a rate card that reflects your direct sales, whether you sell by position or whether you sell by subsection. But as we're going to probably see a little bit later, there's other ways around selling by position. You can also use things like key values. Okay. So my advice, going back to your question, would be if you do not have direct sales, you don't need to go into this level of complexity, and you need to think of the other 2 drivers behind inventory structure, which are reporting and which are trafficking. So if you want to have ease of reporting and ease of trafficking, then it might be just necessary to have maybe the top level, for example, to see where your impressions are going and to see how performance is going and for optimization purposes. Okay. So yeah, that would be my advice.
That's great, thank you.
So going back to the presentation now, scenario number 2. So I think scenario number 2 really follows quite closely behind scenario number 1. The main difference here is that in scenario number 2, we have multiple different sites, which could be different sites, for example. It could be a .com, .co.uk, or a .de version, or they could be wholly different sites that are completely different in look, feel, and content. You could have multiple different apps, or you could have a mixture of sites and apps. So this is scenario number 2. In this example, we're going to use an example of 2 sites, reviewcenter.com. And let's imagine that there's another domain called reviewcenter.co.uk. That is pretty much the exact same layout of the site, just on a different domain. So in this case, our top level ad unit in the hierarchy structure should be dedicated to the individual sites. Of course, you'll want to know how performant, want to be able to report, and you want to be able to sell directly based on the different domains, because you'll have different demand sources for each, or you may have different demand sources for each. So then if you've understood our first scenario correctly, where we had one site or app, the second level for scenario number 2 follows quite easily in terms of logic. You need to make a choice whether you want to sell by sections or positions. Now, of course, because your first level has been dedicated towards your different sites or apps, again, you can't be more granular. You can't be as granular as you could have been in scenario number 1. But again, there are different ways around this with key values that we can discuss in further detail. And just to note that when you are working with multiple sites or different apps, your second level, if you are working through sections, well, you should maybe match the form and content of your site, as we saw with the review center. So your sections could represent home, electronics, entertainment, home and garden, etc. Okay. So let's have a look at a deep dive on the two different scenarios with multiple sites. So if we were to look at our top level ad unit structure, should be reviewcenter.com and reviewcenter.co.uk. In one example on the left, we've divided it up by sections. So we've got home, electronics, entertainment, and so on, matching the content of our site. And in the second example on the right, we've done the exact same with our reviewcenter.co.uk ad unit at the top in this case, but perhaps our demand from this particular domain comes by position. So leaderboard, MPU, skyscraper, etc., etc. Okay, so just to recap on the two different scenarios and the 4 different use cases. On the right-hand side, this is the example where you have one site or app. So your top level should always be devoted to the content of your web page. So in this example, it could be home, electronics, entertainment, etc. And then you have a choice at the second level. You'll either divide it up by further subsections. So for example, under entertainment, we might have computers, phones, audio. Or you can have your second level devoted to positions, top, middle, skyscraper. Again, I really can't reiterate this point enough, that this is completely driven by your direct sales and the demand for your direct sales. And your direct sales is usually, and your direct sales and inventory structure usually correlate with your rate card that you have. Then on the left-hand side, we have the scenario number 2 and the 2 use cases there. Top level should always be devoted to the different sites or different apps that you have. And the second level is, again, that same trade-off between section and position. So I think now we're going to deep dive into the actual user interface in DFP and show you exactly how to set up an ad unit. So all of the ad units live under the inventory section on the left-hand side navigation, and under ad units. If we wanted to set up a new ad unit, for example, we would select current level because we're at the top level. And let's go back to our website for a second and see what type of categories are there. So as you can see on our website here, we have different ones like electronics, entertainment, home and garden. But for this time, let's go with entertainment. So set up an ad unit for entertainment. So we'll call it entertainment test, something like that. Yeah, and then below, name is purely for trafficking and reporting purposes, and the description, that's something that you can fill out for your traffickers or for people if you want to leave special notes concerning this ad unit. Then it's as simple as saving, and you've got an ad unit set up. But let's deep dive a little bit into entertainment, and we want to set up some sub ad units. So if we go back to our website, and we have a look at the drop down, we've got some subsections here. So for example, we've got an interesting one like film reviews, and we've got TV and radio. So why don't we choose those 2 as sub ad units? Of course, you could select them all as your sub ad units, but what we would say is you only really need to create the ad units if they've got direct demand going towards them. So under entertainment, we have that selected. We press new ad unit, and then we go one below entertainment test. And this time, let's give it a name. We had, what was it again? It was, we had film reviews, for example. So we could choose film reviews, all one word. Yeah. And then we scroll down and let's input a size, let's say a 728 by 90. This is sort of a common size that a lot of you will be working with. And in fact, with the Review Center, we have a 728 by 90 showing. And then we press save, and it's as simple as that. Maybe we'll set up one more under entertainment test, just for good measure. So what did we say we were going to use? TV and radio. So we'll set up one more. This one we'll call TV and radio. Yeah. And let's set up an ad size at 300 by 250. So our classic MPU size. Great. Then press save there. And now remember, this goes back to the point I mentioned about the parent-child relationship. So if you were to target the ad unit entertainment, it would automatically target film reviews and TV and radio. However, if you wanted to exclusively target either film reviews or radio, when it comes to trafficking, which we'll be showing you in our next Hangout on Air in July or in June, or July, we can show you how to individually target sub ad units. Okay. So that's great. So that's how you set up an ad unit. So we're going to go back to the presentation now, and we're going to talk a little bit about key values. Great. So I mentioned this a lot, and a lot of you may have heard of key values, but key values are a really good way of passing additional information to DFP and to your ad request. So for example, if you had an external user base or some type of sign-up database, you might be able to pass external information or information on that to users, about users into the DFP ad request. Equally, you could do this to gender, perhaps information on occupation that you've collected. It's a really good way for targeting specific article IDs or specific pages. But in following on in the same vein of thought that we were just speaking about, it's a really good way of targeting positions. So oftentimes we find that you could be setting up an awful lot of ad units if you sell by positions. So oftentimes key values can be a smoother way of doing this for you. So this is just to reiterate, if you sell by position, it could be better to sell by key values. So you have an additional layer of content or hierarchy. So obviously, if you don't need to use the second level for positions, then that frees up an additional layer of content hierarchy, which you can use for sections or whatever you want. So let's have a look at how it looks in the example. So in our previous example on the left-hand side here, we can see an ad unit called Sport, and our second level is called Top Banner. However, if you were to use key values, you could still use this same ad unit called Sport, and this time you could just input a position equals Top Banner. So this is something really easy that we can show you how to input now. So we're going to go into the DFP user interface. And key values, well, they live under the inventory section, as everything does in this portion of the course. And if we go to new key, as you can see, we've set up some already. And for example, we wanted to set up a key maybe on occupation. Occupation, again, display name purely for trafficking. And then you have a choice between whether it's freeform or predefined. So if you want predefined, you generate the list now ahead of time. And if it's freeform, it's something you input as you traffic. Okay, so let's add some predefined roles. So for example, you could have doctor, you could have teacher, nurse, and so on, and press apply. Okay, and yeah, once we do this, all we need to do is press save. This one's already in use, so why don't we call it occupation test? Yeah, and press save. Okay, this is perfect. Great. So that's key values, a really good way, whether you want to pass additional information, be it on position, be it on occupation, gender, or whatever you want. And later when we show you the tagging, we'll show you how the functionality comes into play for positional placements. Okay, so back to the presentation now. And we're going to talk about the last section of inventory structure. It's called placements. Now, placements, again, are a really good way of grouping together multiple different ad units for the purpose of ease of trafficking and the purpose of direct sales. These are really, really simple to implement, and we're just going to go right ahead and show you now. So placements, again, in the DFP user interface, live under inventory. And as you can see, we have our choice of ad units at the top or placements. So if we just click on placements, then it's an idea of calling a new placement. So let's call it placement test, for example. Yeah, description, again, completely optional. And then we just need to include some ad units we've already created. So under our entertainment, why don't we include, why don't we include entertainment? And why don't we include one of the ones we've already pre-populated called sport? Perfect. So this is a really good idea if we were selling these regularly to direct sales or really trafficking these regularly together as a bundle. It's a good idea to group them together. And this will really come into play when you see our next live stream in July. And then all we need to do is press save, and it's automatically saved. Okay. So tagging migration, a high-level overview. So most of you are probably new users to AdSense, in which case you're probably new to tagging. So we're going to show you how to generate the tag. It's very, very simple. So if we go back into the ad units we had previously created, and entertainment, for example, and we go to our lower level, for example, TV and radio, or film and web, maybe it's better. So if we go to our film and web, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see there is a button for generate tag, and the key, and we press that. And there are various different types of tags. So Google Publisher tag, that's our sort of gold standard. That's the one that's been in use since DFP's inception. We also have mobile application tags. So if you're working with an app, these are the ones that you would select. And we also have accelerated mobile page tags. So these are new tags or newish tags that we've created, which support AMP structure. But we're going to go ahead with Google Publisher Tag for the moment, and we're going to press continue. Make sure that enable single request mode is on, because if you're trafficking multiple different ad sizes within one ad unit, you want all of the ads to be called at the same time. This generally lends to a better user experience and overall better page load speed. Then, for example, we've got two differences here: page level targeting and inventory unit level targeting. So if you have multiple different ad sizes in your ad unit, you could target either individual ad slots, or you could target via inventory targeting, or if you want to target everything, you target via page level. So this might be a really good example where we can input our key value. So as you can see, we already have one position pre-populated, and we've selected top. This is a really good idea because we're actually targeting a 728 by 90 here. So then if we were to press continue, for example, the big difference between AdSense and DFP is that AdSense has one snippet of code, whereas DFP has two. One portion needs to be inputted into the header of your page, and the other portion needs to be inputted into the body of your page. And this will pass along all the requests, including the key values. As we can see here, the first portion of the script will be inserted into the header of your page, and the second portion will be inserted into the body of your page. And as you can see down at the bottom of the first portion, it has position equals top. So this is a good way of targeting the top portion of your site, so that you can control the look and feel of how your advertisement is placed. Again, key values, an alternative to ad units. Alternatively, you could traffic an ad unit which was based on position. So I think that's it from a high-level overview. I'm going to hand you back over to Olivia, who's going to go through the key takeaways.
Great. No, thank you very much for that, Cillian. Really, really helpful. So key takeaways we'd like you to take from today. The first being to ensure that you set up your basic functionality in the admin section of your DFP interface. The next thing that we recommend you to do is have a real think about how you want to set up your inventory within DFP, with particular note to your direct sales, trafficking and reporting. And then the final note to make is that key values can be used as an alternative to ad units for position. Perfect. Okay, well, additional to this, we've also included some really useful resources in order to help you set up in DFP.
Which are available on the screen here.
So if you go to Publisher University, which you'll have access to once you sign in for DFP, this is the best place to help pick up your speed with all training relevant to DFP. We've also included the links to our DFP Help Centre, the network setup process, and also solutions to common problems which other publishers face, and a link to the release notes, which provide updates, according to what's going on with DFP. And then finally, as we mentioned at the start of the live stream, please do go and register via g.co/AdSense on air, just to be kept up to date with our future live streams. And then in a few moments, we'll go to our Q&A. Perfect. And yeah, as we mentioned as well at the beginning, we'd really appreciate it if you filled out our feedback survey, as this is a way that we can hopefully improve the live streams going forward. Great. Okay. Well, last thing to note. So our next live stream will be on Wednesday, the 13th of June. And this is on news consumer insights. So this is a new free dashboard built on top of Google Analytics. And this will help news organizations of all sizes to understand and segment their audiences with a subscriptions strategy in mind. And then, as we've mentioned throughout the live stream today, we're also going to hold a second session on DFP next steps, and we'll walk you through trafficking and how to help you create your first orders. And this will be held on Wednesday, the 11th of July. Great. Well, I think that's everything. So thank you very much for joining our live stream today, and let's jump into the Q&A.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, just bear with us a second. We're just going to pull up the questions for the Q&A. Just above on that top tab.
No, that's on
Go to questions. Sorry about this, guys. Sorry, just bear with us a second. We're just trying to get to the Q&A. Oh, perfect. Great. Okay, so yeah, so thank you for your questions. First question is around last time. So sorry, Dragon's asked a question to say when he tried using DFP last time, he was just serving AdSense line items. Is there any value therefore in having DFP?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the two main reasons why you would have DFP in the first place. DFP is only really for publishers who have got multiple ad networks in competition with one another. So that's multiple ad networks or SSPs and or a lot of direct sales. So from that perspective, we would definitely say if you don't have at least one of those, so either multiple ad networks in competition with one another, or that you have direct sales, then DFP is not something for you at this moment in time. But as you develop more indirect demand with those SSPs and ad networks and potentially some direct sales, then DFP is definitely something for you.
Great. Okay. So
then I think Mohammed had a question about what is dynamic allocation.
Yes, I think we touched on this before. So just in brief, so it's a feature that is within DFP, and it enables for your guaranteed or reserved line items to compete with AdSense or the rest of your remnant line items without interfering with the ultimate goal of your guaranteed line items. So yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's exactly as Olivia said, it's a way to put in competition both your guaranteed, which are your direct sales, and your non-guaranteed in direct competition with one another so that you produce the highest yield. DFP does this intuitively and does this in a way that it does not compromise your direct sales. So your direct sales are always guaranteed and will always deliver. I suppose we wanted to go into a little bit more detail, which we'll be covering totally in our next live stream. But how DFP does this is that it generates a temporary cost or an opportunity cost of not serving a guaranteed line item at a given time. So when your guaranteed line items are performing very well, perhaps on time or ahead of time, that temporary CPM that DFP automatically generates will be quite low or reasonable. So the competition from the likes of AdSense and your other third-party SSPs or networks will be able to potentially compete with it. As your guaranteed line items start falling a little bit behind in terms of pacing, what DFP will do is it'll ramp up the temporary CPM, which you never see. It's all done in the blink of an eye, and it'll make it very, very difficult for AdSense and other demand sources to beat it, thus resulting in that your guaranteed inventory will always serve on time and will deliver in full.
Great. Okay. So we've got
maybe if we
question.
Abdul asks, do I have to pay for DFP? A good question, Abdul. So yeah, the question is, do you have to pay for DFP? DFP SB is a free to serve a product up to a point. So we have a minimum threshold that you can use. But that threshold is dependent on a multiple different varieties. So for most of the publishers here, you'll definitely fall underneath the threshold. And if and when this applies to you, you'll be prompted if you need to pay. So for the moment, you can take it as is a free to use product unless you are notified within your user interface.
Great. And maybe time for two more quick questions. So Addy's asked, is there a limit to the number of users he can add on DFP?
No, but it's a good question. So there are certain limits to DFP, and they concern mainly your key values, how many keys you can have, how many values you can have, how many line items you can have per order. And all of those limits are actually found in the admin section, which Olivia was showing you earlier, under a section called limits. So if you need to reference anything, it's there.
Yeah, so that's just under the global settings and then limits.
And maybe one more question.
Ali then. So when should I use ad units for positions and key values?
Yeah, this is a really good question. You know, I mean, I suppose the best setup is that if you have multiple, potentially hundreds or thousands of different second level ad units, we would definitely recommend that key values is probably the best way to go then. They're just from a complexity of setup point of view and just from a neatness in trafficking and reporting. But you got to understand that there's a certain trade-off off with using key values as opposed to ad units. Key values in the reporting section, which we'll be looking at more in our second session on this topic. Key values are limited in the amount of other dimensions and metrics that they can be combined with it. So it's more limited, and you have to do a lot more manual work in the reporting if you want to get exactly what you're looking for. On the other hand, ad units are very simple to combine with other metrics and dimensions, but that's not to say that it'll be like this forever. There may be a update on the way soon, which could change all of this.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, I think that's all we've got time for. But yeah, thank you so much again for joining the live stream. We hope it was of value, and stay tuned for our next live stream. Perfect.
Great.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.